In this lesson, we'll talk about simple setup for our initial architecture of a room and discuss the overall set creation concepts. Alright, so whenever we dive into environment modeling and creating sets, there are a couple of things that we might want to keep in mind when building those. So if you've never built an environment or a set before, you want to try to keep things simple. You want to start out with getting the ideas and the workflows together for creating the overall architecture itself. So to get started with that, I normally like to just create just a simple box, okay, in the scene, and I'll go ahead and I'll set up my length, width, and height for this. So on my length, I'm going to set this up to about 100, and then my width to 100. And then my height, I'm going to set that to about 96. Now that's just keeping inches in mind, so 96 is a good value for that. So we have a squared room for this, and now what we want to do is we want to create the rest of this set. So let's say that we have kind of a different configuration for this set. I'll go ahead and I'll convert it to an editable poly, and I could do it a number of ways. I could come in and I could select just this one polygon and extrude that out by using just my move tool, or I can extrude it out using the actual extrude tool itself. So I can come in and say 100 on that extrusion, and that'll kind of create kind of a corner area that is separated off from this area of the room. And then I could create kind of an L-shape set, so I could extrude this out. Let's say that this is set to 160 or so. And now I've got the base shape for my set. Now, whenever we are working with sets or environments like this, normally what we'll have is we'll have these walls kind of separated out and deleted. So that way, whenever we have our camera in the view, we're only seeing what's on the inside of the room itself. We don't necessarily need the walls that we're not going to see anyway. So, for example, for your final project, you're going to be creating just a still image for your set, and the camera is going to be stationary. So we don't necessarily need those walls that we don't see anyway. Now, if you were creating an animation to where a character is going to be moving back and forth using one particular camera or a series of cameras and getting different angles of that character in different areas of your set, you may have to plan a little bit better for some of these walls to be in place for those different camera shots. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Also, whenever you are creating environments for games, we don't necessarily know where the player is going to go, and so we need to create an environment that is completely enclosed to where a character could go really anywhere in the level. So something like this where we have walls that are deleted are not going to be helpful in games. So those are just a couple of concepts that you might want to keep in mind. Now, another thing that we want to keep in mind with this geometry is that we are going to be rendering the inside of this box, and so we need to make sure that our normals are facing the correct way. So if you're in polygon mode and you select one of the polygons on the inside, if it looks dark like this, that means that the normal is facing the other direction. So as you can see, this is really bright red. The normal is facing outward, and so this is not going to render. So if I come in here and hit the render button, you can see that nothing has happened here. There's nothing being rendered. So what I need to do is select all the polygons in my geometry and simply flip the normals, and I can do this by simply hitting flip. Here you can see that it's bright red on the inside now, and if I hit render, we can now see the walls and the ceiling. Another thing that you want to take into account with your geometry for your environments is you may want to separate out the different parts of the environment. So for example, the walls here, you may want to detach these from the box itself and name this walls. So that way you have the freedom of modeling only on the walls themselves and the ceiling and floor being separate. Normally I like to separate those as well. So I'll detach this, hit flip, or not flip, I'm sorry, detach. And then we'll say ceiling. And then finally what's left is going to be the floor. Okay, and then normally what I like to do at this point is go ahead and select all three of those and go to my hierarchy panel, effect pivot only, and center to object. So that way their pivot points are centered on those particular objects. Okay. If I need to move those pivot points later on, I can do so, but I normally like to center them up at the very beginning like this. So now that we have our walls kind of set up here, I'm going to go ahead and apply a material just to make this a little bit easier to see. Let me take the gray value down just a little bit, make that a little lighter. And now we want to start talking about how to create things like windows and doorways, and what are some things that we need to watch out for whenever creating those. First off, you need to make sure that you have the segments in place for your windows. So for example, if I were going to create some particular windows on this wall, I would go to Edge Mode and select these two edges, which is a ring, and use Connect to create a segment between the two. Now normally I like to set up two segments for each side of the window, and then I'll use Pinch and Slide to position those and get their proper proportions. So I'll go to 22, and then I'll slide this down somewhere maybe around here or so, and hit OK. And then at this point what I can do is just select all of the edges here and use Connect, and kind of do the same thing here. So if I take my pinch and I draw that up, let's go to something like around 38. Then I can go ahead and take these edges and pull those up there. And at this point I can just select that polygon, and I can simply extrude that backward in a negative direction. And this will give me the ability to basically make a placement for my window. Okay, so this is kind of the hole that you would cut out of the wall. It's not necessarily the window frame or anything like that. If you think about how your walls are built, there's drywall and then 2x4s on the inside, and things like that. So you get a thickness of around 6 inches or so, which is why I set that extrusion to 6.0. Okay, so there's a good value to go with there. So now here comes the issue of, what if I want multiple windows along this wall? If I come in and I select these edges and I do just the same thing that I did there, I have the issue of, I'm not sure exactly what the width was, because last time I had it set to 22, and obviously that's too large. So what I could do is go ahead and just hit Connect and leave that just the way it is, and then use the polygons that I've created for the window inset. So if I grow that selection and I hold down Shift and drag that over, it's kind of a template for my window. So now all I have to do is simply take this window, move it forward so I can see exactly what's going on, and then I can take the edges on my wall that I just created and position those onto my area here. So if I hit F4, might make things a little bit easier to see, and I can line those up a little bit better. So here you can see that that is right on that window casing. So now I can select that polygon there and extrude that back exactly where I need it, and I have this template that I can keep or I can get rid of. It doesn't really matter. So that's just kind of one of those tricks that we have if we need extra windows on a particular wall and we're using that ring loop connection there. Now another way to create doors and windows, we could select the particular polygons that we want, and we could use Inset. Now this is going to create a little bit of a different set of topology. As you can see, it creates 4 quads on the outside of this polygon. So I could set this to something like 8, and I could scale this to get the proportions that I need, and then extrude it out to get my window. So again, it creates just a different set of topology for this. It's not necessarily cleaner than this. I do prefer this look here because it's just a little bit easier to work with. However, there may be instances where you need something like this. So doors and windows can be done either way. Now another thing that we need to talk about with our walls and things like that is that we need to make sure that we are smoothing these properly. If we take a look at our render here, it's very sharp edges, and there really aren't any sharp edges in any type of environment unless it's specifically made that way to be sharp and dangerous. So here what I want to do is I want to kind of take a look at how we can create a corner and how that's going to be smoothed out. So I'm going to take this corner, double click on that edge, and I'm going to use chamfer to split that. Okay, kind of create a diagonal edge here. So we'll take that to 24, and I'm going to put one segment right in the middle of that. And I'm going to take that segment, go to my top view by hitting T on the keyboard, and let's hit F3 so we can see our wireframe, and then grab our move tool. And I'm going to bring this down to be pretty much right in line right here, and then I'm going to pull it over my X and try to get that as straight as possible right there. Okay, and then I can go to vertex mode by hitting 1 on the keyboard. I can take those vertices here and scale those in the X, and then also take these and scale those in the Y, just to make sure that that edge is perfectly straight. And once we have that set there, again, looking at that, if we do a render, that's a very sharp corner, and it doesn't give us much of a highlight. It doesn't really give us much of a shape. So normally what I like to do is I like to select corners like that, and even on the windows themselves, and use chamfer and take that chamfer amount down, obviously, to right about 1, which is our default value, and do 2 segments. And what this will do is create a very smooth corner on that, and it doesn't appear to be quite as dangerous, and it's a little more realistic. It makes it more readable in your render, so you can definitely see that that's a corner there. We've got a nice little highlight that is popping off of that because of that. Same thing like on your windows here, like around the window seals, you may want to come in and do just a quick chamfer on that. I want to pull that one down just a little bit more, maybe 0.5, to tighten that up. And again, if you do a render on that, you can see how that pops and really makes that edge look a little more appealing. Okay, so those are some things to just kind of watch out for whenever you are creating your architecture and getting that built up. Now, in the next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to model using different styles. Up to this point, we've just kind of modeled realistically, not really thinking about particular styles like cartoons or anything like that. And we're just going to talk about how to model consistently using different styles. So I'll see you then.